Hello, for my Moreland Module 6 activity, I'm breaking down the Common Core Standard W6.8. So the writing for the 6th graders, which is one of the classes I teach. It's actually my largest class. So the standard itself is gather relevant information from multiple print and digital sources, assess the credibility of each source, and quote or paraphrase the data and conclusions of others while avoiding plagiarism and providing basic bibliographic information for sources. The reason I chose this is in my class, we've already done a lot of narrative writing, and we are ready to start delving more deeper into academic writing. So starting off with 5-paragraph essays, research assignments, and looking up sources. And they're basically at the level already where this is going to start getting relevant. That's the main reason I chose it. Now, starting off with our instructor's guidance, we go ahead and go through all the verbs. That's going to help us understand the different skills the students need to learn. Going through the verbs pretty easy. Then when I started to get to the nouns, I'm like, okay, this is information overload, so it's a little bit too much for me. So what I ended up doing is instead just going through and looking at each of, I'm missing a slide, but basically going through all of the different steps one by one and assessing what skills do they need in order to do that. For instance, gather relevant information from multiple print and digital sources. Well, for something like that, they need to know how to get information. Obviously, how you get information from a digital source is different from a printed source. The printed source is a little easier for them. They have many years experience doing that. Digital sources, they have some experience, but it definitely is a skill that needs to improve. So starting off with this one, following the other couple points that I'll get into later, I'd like to introduce the first project where we would have, which is a source gathering project. The first thing I do is just get to know the students on how they would look up information. After I hear their answers, I'll show them how I would look up information. I'd get on Bing, and I'd look up a topic, and I'd pull up some information on that. The reason I use Bing, of course, is because Google's not usable here in China, and Baidu just pulls it all up in Chinese. So Bing's the best answer I found. So after that, the class is going to spend a few minutes just brainstorming different ideas to talk about. And I do this mostly because there are some students that maybe they're not that creative on their own, and they could really benefit from hearing ideas of others. So after we get some ideas out there, I'd break the class up into different small groups, and we would go down to the computer lab because we don't have technology in our classroom. We'd go down to the computer lab, and they would try to look up as much information about that source as they can. From that, this would have to follow a different lecture or a different lesson on how to actually assess the credibility of each source. So the students would have to know what credibility is, how you can see if a source is credible or not, and a lot of that is going to be by using this checklist. So this checklist for evaluation, they can go through it, and they can find out, hey, is this source credible, or is it some random guy just talking? So that, of course, would follow a lesson or two on assessing credibility. So after they have gathered their sources and they found out that their sources are credible, the next step is to share their information. And with this, what better way than making posters? Students love making posters. And that is going to help them be able to present their findings in an academic way. Data is going to need to be quoted. And with quoting, you would also have to have a works cited page for this project. And as I said, a works cited page is probably a little overkill for making a poster, but here it would still be good information for them. It's a good, not information, it's still good practice for them in learning how to actually document sources in an MLA form, cite sources in an MLA format. So that's project one. Oops, Sorry, I only have the one project. But then after that, the next step is, big picture questions. So some of the big picture questions I'm thinking of is, why is assessing, I'm missing an adjective there. Why is assessing credibility important? Like, why is this something that we need to do? Who can actually be considered a credible source? When do we need to cite our sortations? And how can we avoid plagiarism when we do cite our sortations? Plagiarism is another big topic that I don't think gets talked about enough at our school, because even though we all, like all the teachers, talk about plagiarism, it still happens a lot more than it really should. So plagiarism is itself another area that we would have to spend a lot of time in, and something that I think a wonderful activity for plagiarism would be something like what Moreland did with our cohort, where we actually have to make an anti-plagiarism poster. A lot of 2 different poster assignments. Maybe that's a little repetitive, but hey, it works. And students love being creative and expressing their artistic talent. So what better way of doing that than posters? While we do this, of course, we do have students of different levels of literacy, especially when it comes to trying to assess credibility of sources. It could be really difficult for people who have lower levels of English. So my plan on that is, for those specific students, I would show them how to use a certain extension on Firefox. It's called the Mate extension. There's also a Google Translate extension, but I wouldn't want them translating the entire page, right? Maybe if their English language is really horrible, then they can first read it in their native language and then read it in English. But for the most part, it would be, if there's a certain key word that you don't know, you'd be able to translate that one word. And it's really easy. You just move your mouse pointer over the word and it automatically translates it for you. So that should certainly enable accessibility to students of all sorts of languages. And of course, I would be by their side with them as they go, being able to see, oh, are you doing this right? Is there something you don't understand? And I'd be able to further help them out with that. Anyways, can't believe it's been 7 minutes already. I'll stop it here.